Filling out a tax return in a country like the Netherlands may be complicated. You can just go to the portal and see what you have to fill out. There is also a phone line help desk, the Belastingtelefoon, but should you tell the tax service system in advance what you're trying to do with your tax system? Is it wise to call them? Can you call them anonymously? Steve Ten Bokum, how does that work?
Well, when you call the tax phone, there is a couple of different ways to approach that, because you can just give them your PSN and have them look at the information they have for you, and have them discuss with you how to process that way. But you're also allowed to just ask general questions there without giving your name or personal information. So if there's something you're not sure that you did, for example, that you're not sure whether that's okay or allowed, yes, then you can call them, ask a general question about that and see how they react, what they tell you. But yeah, the problem is with the tax phone, the tax authorities helpline, is that the people that help you there, they are knowledgeable about the tax system, but they don't deal with expats and their approach to things as often. So what they tell them is often a little bit misinterpreted. Whilst, for example, an advisor that focuses on expats, they know, okay, well, if I tell an expat this way, he has dealt with this system in this country, so he is familiar with how this ruling, for example, will work. He can give you a little bit more of a personal touch and adjust what he tells you based on your situation.
What I hear you say is that people at the help desk of the Belastingdienst, the Belastingtelefoon, may not always be perfectly knowledgeable about everything. I did not hear you say their task is to earn as much money for the Dutch for the Dutch as a country
I understand.
as possible.
Because that's officially also not their task. First of all, there's a difference between the people who are on the tax phone and the people who are actually reviewing the tax returns that are filed. Those are tax inspectors. But for both of them, their job is to get to the most correct outcome of your return as possible. They're not maliciously, at least in general, they're not maliciously trying to increase the amount of taxes you have to pay, because it's also their job to get to a proper outcome of things. But of course, they need to deal with the information as it's presented to them. They have the return that you filled out with all the information. They have some information from other institutions that they can use to match it up, see if everything is correct. But at the end of the day, of course, they are not you. They haven't lived the past tax year in your shoes, so they don't have all the details about your situation. So what you need to do is make sure that what you fill in your tax return is also easily interpreted by someone who does not have all those little background details to fill in the blanks.
And you cannot blame the guy on the Belastingtelefoon if you misinterpreted something or if he gives a certain advice and that turns out not to be true. So you have to be careful. There is no legal status on the advice that you get at the Belastingtelefoon.
At the Belastingtelefoon, yes, that's true. This is based on a legal principle we have here in the Netherlands called the trust principle. This basically means that when a government agency makes a statement about how something works or how a certain part of your income is taxed, then you are allowed to trust that statement. And if at a later point someone from the government says, well, that was completely wrong, they can just issue fines for that based on the fact that they gave you a statement in which they said it was correct.
But then you have to prove that.
Yes, they do have to prove that. But basically,
I've heard a number of cases where people call up the Belastingtelefoon and they get some advice which turned out not to be correct, but could not rely on that.
Because the tax phone is a specific exception to that principle. Yes, that's the principle. So the trust principle does not apply to the tax phone. It does apply to the tax inspectors, so the people handling your tax return. Anything they state is the trust principle is applicable, as long as it's explicitly stated. They can't just make a vague reference to it. It doesn't need to be stated. But it does not apply to people at the tax phone. So if you call them for help, they will mostly give you correct answers. But you cannot go back to that and say, well, they told me this, so this should be correct, and I should be able to do it this way, because that principle does not apply to them.
Steve Ten Bokum of Expat-Service. You work for an organization that gives advice.
Yes.
Can you be held liable for the advice that you give?
To a certain extent, of course. We can't just blatantly state things that are just not true. And we do have care obligation and zorgplicht, as we call this in Dutch, where we have to help our clients to the best of our abilities. However, in principle, someone is always responsible for their own tax return. This is also something we have put into our processes. Not only do we inform people that they are always responsible for their own tax return, but we always provide a draft, have them accept or reject that return before we file something. We always give people the opportunity to review, ask questions, more clarification regarding the tax returns we draft, so that they are properly informed. But also because they remain responsible, so they should have the opportunity to look through that.
So if you have to file a tax return and you say that your great competence is to innovate and to do research in technology, you're still responsible for your own tax return. So you better dive into that into detail and know what is happening there. That's a topic that we like to discuss with the Expert Service and here on Radio from Brainport.